খণ্ডন ভব বন্ধন জগবন্দন বন্দে তোমায় নিরঞ্জন রূপ ধর নিরঞ্জন রূপ ধর নির্গুণ গুণময় মোচন অঘ দূষণ জগ দূষণ চিত ঘন কায় জ্ঞানাঞ্জন বিমল নয়ন জ্ঞানাঞ্জন বিমল নয়ন বিখানে মোহ যায় ভাস্বর ভাব সাগর চির উন্মাদ প্রেম পাথার ভক্তার জন যুগল চরণ ভক্তার জন যুগল চরণ তারণ ভব পার শ্রীম মৃত যুগ ঈশ্বর জগদীশ্বর যোগ সহায় নিরঞ্জন সমাহিত মন নিরঞ্জন সমাহিত মন নিরাখি তব কৃপায় ভঞ্জন দুঃখ গঞ্জন করুণা sharam hem naram varam tyagish sharam hem naram varam deha padem anum nirbhaya gata samshaya driranyeshaya manasa van nishkaranam bhagata sharana nishkaranam bhagata sharana taji jati kula Shampada Tava Sri Pada Bhava Kushpada Vari Yathai Premar Pano Shamandaram Shana Premar Pano Shamandaram Shana Jaga Jana Dukha Jaya Shampada Tava Sri Pada Bhava Kushpada Variyathai Premarpana Shamadarashana Premarpana Shamadarashana Jagajana Dukha Jaya Namo Namo Prabhu Vakyamanadita Namo Namo Prabhu Vakyamanadita Manuvachanaika Dhar Prabhu Manuvachanaika Dhar Jyotira Jyotiyo Jala Hridhi Kandar Jyotira Jyotiyo Jala Hridhi Kandar Tumitam Bhanjanahar Prabhu Tumitam Bhanjanahar Namo Namo Prabhu Vakyamanadita Namo Namo Prabhu Vakyamanadita Manuvachanaika Dhar Prabhu Manuvachanaika Dhar Jyotira Jyotiyo Jala Hridhi Kandar Jyotira Jyotiyo Jala Hridhi Kandar Tumitam Bhanjanahar Prabhu Tumitam Bhanjanahar Dede Langa Ranga Bhanga Vaje Anga Shanga Mridanga Dede Langa Ranga Bhanga Vaje Anga Shanga Mridanga Gaiche Chanda Bhakata Vrinda Arati Tomar Gaiche Chanda Bhakata Vrinda Arati Tomar Jaya Jaya Arati Tomar Har Har Arati Tomar Shiva Shiva Arati Tomar Khandana Bhava Bandhana Jaga गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं त्वमचलो गुणजित् गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो। भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्त्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो। तेजस्तरन्ति तरसां त्वयि तृप्त तृष्णां रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्मि नाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो। कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी शान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ। यस्मादहं तु अशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो। ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल माङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ राधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागतो दीनार्तो परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. Hello, check. Namashri Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So we had completed this lecture of Vivekananda, Maya and the Evolution of the Concept of God last time. There's actually a fair bit there. So before we start with the next lecture, let me just summarize the last part for a few minutes. So last time, I said that there were a few major points that Vivekananda makes at the end of this lecture, Maya and the Evolution of the Concept of God. One of them is the statement, we see then that through freedom the sciences were built. One. Second, amongst the great saints, particularly the writers of the Upanishads, particularly the authors of the Upanishads, he mentions this one particular quality, not just the capacity to analyze deeply, but also what we colloquially or popularly refer to as qualities of the heart, namely sympathy or empathy with a large section, perhaps all of humanity. Yeah? And therefore, they make this statement, this is the kind of situation that arises when older notions of divinity that people believed in at a certain point of time come in conflict with two things. A rational kind of inquiry. Two, a certain higher ethical value. And these become, these get into conflict with older ideas of a God of power and, simultaneously mercy. And the question that is raised is how can infinite power and infinite mercy coexist? And essentially what this question really bases itself on is that these two values that we as human beings possess to some extent are desirable. What? An inquiry into truth, so truth being the fundamental value. And this is what is represented by this statement that the sciences were built out of freedom. Freedom for what? Freedom to inquire into truth. So one value, truth. The other value, sympathy or empathy, which means a capacity to identify with the joys and woes of a larger group of people, say at the limit all of humanity. Yeah? And so he makes this other statement that, well, the atheists were preaching certain questions which challenged the old dogma, which challenged the old doctrines. And these authors of the Upanishads, these people who had this great sympathy in their hearts, understood that there was a great deal of truth in what the atheists were saying, the atheists and the Buddhists. Yeah, the agnostics were saying. These were going against the conventional wisdom of the time, and they were asking questions of it. And this aspect of truth that was there in the doubts that were being raised by atheists and agnostics, the authors, the saints, actually realized that there is a substantial part of what they were saying that was true. Why? because there is in such saints a simultaneous commitment to these two fundamental values, namely truth and sympathy for all. So on the one hand, because of their commitment to truth, they understood that these the doubts that were being raised, the enquiry that was being instituted by atheists and agnostics did have what Vivekananda calls a good deal of truth, nay, great nuggets of truth. On the other hand, because of their sympathy, they also realized that, look, just an anarchistic destruction of existing social norms and mores would not suffice, just a negative destruction would not suffice to conduce to human welfare. So on the one hand, because of their commitment to truth, the element of truth in the questions they are raising, in the doubts they are raising. On the other hand, sympathy for this larger society, for this larger group of people, species, humanity itself, that sympathy prevents them from merely denouncing, merely saying that all this is rubbish and this is wrong. So wherein lies the solution? Wherein lies the solution between these two apparently opposing forces? On the one hand, a staunch standing by truth and the spirit of enquiry to lead to that truth. One. On the other, sympathy and empathy for all of humanity itself, which prevents them from merely denouncing and saying that there is this, all these old beliefs are rubbish, throw them overboard. What is the resolution? What is the resolution of this conflict in the minds and hearts of these great saints who were simultaneously committed to one truth and the enquiry as a process to lead to that truth, to sympathy and empathy for all? Wherein lies the resolution between these two principal guiding motives of the lives of these saints? This is the question that he was trying to address towards the end of this lecture, Maya and the Evolution of the Concept of God. And the resolution really lies in asking, where is empathy or this oneness of beings based? On the one hand. Two, where is this enquiry of truth, the spirit of enquiry into truth based? So two fundamental human values, truth on the one hand, unselfishness or benevolent kindness or love, whatever you want to call it, sympathy, empathy. Where are these two based? The conflict, therefore, does exist at a certain level of the human psyche. In order to resolve this conflict, one needs necessarily, as always, with these fundamental questions, when there seems to be a contradiction, what is necessary is to penetrate deeper, to enquire deeper, and reach a level of one's psyche, of one's constitution, where the contradiction becomes resolved by seeing these two aspects as aspects of the same reality. What is contradictory at a superficial level, if we penetrate deeper, they turn out to be aspects of the same reality. Let me go back again to this cause of the conflict. On the one hand, basically the enquirers, the agnostics and the atheists, overthrowing the accepted wisdom of the time and saying that, look, these explanations are childish explanations. They do not conduce to truth. Because now we have greater power for rational enquiry, we have greater ethical values. This is one cause. A commitment to truth leads to this particular value on the one hand. On the other, sympathy for larger group of humanity who perhaps cannot penetrate, cannot inquire so deeply. This sympathy for such people, for all people, leads them to refrain from overthrowing the existing, this accepted wisdom of the time. And how to reconcile these two really depends on a change of attitude. So in the hearts of the saints, on the one hand, they take enquiry into truth as something that is given, something that is fundamental, something that defines us as a species, something that is very precious to humanity. At the same time, if it is something precious to humanity, you cannot disregard the vast majority of people. So, the resolution then comes from this statement that they do not denounce but fulfill. Which means they say, okay, this said wisdom, suppose you have some, there are two ways. So let's take a child. Yeah, it has been taught to fear the dark. Yeah, and then there are two ways by which you can handle that child's reaction to the dark, to this fear of the dark. One, you can say, oh, this is just irrational, this is garbage, just throw it away. Does it really affect the child's psyche? Just telling the child, oh, this is rubbish, it's just some play of your mind, you are afraid of the dark. That is the unsympathetic overthrow of this emotional reaction of the child, which we call fear. On the other hand, since it's a common experience amongst human beings to fear the unknown, another person might equally well understand that this fear of the dark, fear of supernatural beings, is irrational. But at the same time, that person might treat the child with sympathy and go towards the same goal, holding the child's hand as it were, asking, so what exactly is it about the dark that you are afraid of? Yes, it is true. You are afraid of the dark? That's nothing uncommon. All of us are afraid of various things. And the greatest fear comes from the unknown. So why are you afraid of the dark? Because you don't know what is there. And so you refrain from. So why don't you do one thing? Simply take a little candle into the dark. I'll accompany you and you go in there and then see for yourself that there is nothing to be afraid of. And then the unknown becomes the known and the root of fear is taken off. So there is this irrational reaction to the dark of the child. There are two responses to it. Both of these are responses of people who know the truth, that there is nothing to be afraid there. That it is merely a play of our emotions which recoil from the unknown. As a result, you can either treat the child unsympathetically, just simply by saying, oh, there is nothing to be afraid in the dark, it's just your childishness, stupidity, it's your irrationality that is making you afraid of the dark. That's one way of handling the problem. But such people, even if they are committed to the truth, they do not have the sympathy in their hearts that the second group of people have. What is that? That is basically by trying to understand and show the child so that it learns for itself that there is nothing to be afraid of in the dark. It is only through this experience of taking light into the dark that one realizes that whatever that one was conjuring up in one's mind as an imagination of some terrible beings hidden there was just that, mere imagination. And once the child reaches that understanding that this darkness was conjuring up fearsome images in its head, then it sees for itself that there is nothing to be afraid of, and fear vanishes. Now, this is reaction of older people in a very simple circumstance, which is something that is common to us all. But the same thing happens at a much larger scale in societies where the social norms of a particular era are designed to help people along to the next step. But then there are some who inquire deeper, who have a greater faculty for inquiry into truth. And amongst such people, there are again two kinds. One, who have seen the truth for themselves and are satisfied that these older prehistoric notions need merely to be dumped into the dustbin. And the only thing they can say is that, look, there is no basis for these, what we typically call superstitions, just throw them into the garbage bin. But there are others who try to understand the reason for these superstitions. They understand that it's social conditioning for years and decades and maybe centuries that has led to these preconceived notions, these superstitions. Hence, to eradicate them from our psyche needs sympathetic handling. And it is this second group of people from whom these great saints arise, who on the one hand, they do understand the truth just as well as the atheists and the agnostics of a time. More precisely, it's not just atheists and agnostics, but people who are devoted to truth above everything else, who are devoted to inquiry into truth above everything else. Great people, but not necessarily equipped with the sympathy or the expanse of heart to understand that not all people are equipped with this fine capacity to inquire into truth. So their sympathy then allows them to lead others step by step through the process of inquiry that they have undergone. And it's this coupling of sympathy on the one hand and inquiry into truth on the other that gives rise to the constitution, to the fundamental nature of these great saints. Where does this inquiry end? And he says in this particular part of this lecture that such was the constitution, such was the combination of the mind and the brain and the heart of these Upanishadic writers. On the one hand, the staunch and steadfast inquiry into truth. Simultaneously, an expansive heart full of sympathy for all. Now, these two faculties, if we look at even biological evolution, I've said this before, this altruism, what we in more secular language call altruism, a capacity to identify with a larger humanity, altruism on the one hand, and this rational inquiry or discrimination or analysis on the other, Both are faculties that are really located in the most evolved part of our brains, namely this prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain just behind our foreheads. So it is these functions that are highly developed in these people: capacity for analysis, capacity for identification with all, which we call sympathy or empathy. It's this combination which is what defines these saints, these authors of the Upanishads. That's where he had come to. All right. Having come there, all right, so this is actually trying to see one of these evolved people, saints or authors of the Upanishads, from outside. Merely in terms of phenomenal understanding, in terms of phenomena of these people, what do we get at? We get at this marvelous synthesis of what we popularly call the head and the heart, namely, if you spell it out, inquiry into truth and sympathy for all. Fine. As an objective inquiry or an inquiry from the outside, as a study from the outside of the psyche of these saints, this is good enough. But what about the person himself or herself? What about the saint himself or herself? How do these two qualities that often contradict each other, how do they coexist? What is their worldview that allows them to simultaneously inquire into truth without compromise and have this marvelous expansive sympathy? What is it in them? What is subjectively the quality in the hearts of these saints that allow them to be sympathetic in the broadest possible sense and simultaneously hold on to truth in the most uncompromising way? What is it in them? What is their subjective quality that holds these two things together? These two qualities which often in the external world throw up contradictions. To understand this, he basically proceeds to the point where he says, yes, the enquiry into the said wisdom, into the accepted wisdom, does end up asking questions of this notion of a monotheistic God. It does end up. So they accept this truth that this notion of an extra-personal God, a God outside the universe ruling us, is not acceptable to such advanced minds. So once you do have this commitment to truth, this kind of a notion of a ruler or a creator becomes inadequate as a notion of a God. What then? What they do is, instead of conducting this objective inquiry and a God outside which rules this universe, this creates this universe, they ask a more fundamental question. Yeah? The unsympathetic person would have simply ruled this out. Okay, this is just superstition, throw it out into the garbage bin. The question these people with sympathy ask is, what is it in us that made us believe in this kind of a creator God or in a ruler? The question flips. It changes direction. Instead of asking, is this ruler of the God, is a ruler God, is a creator God rational or not? They ask the more fundamental question penetrating into our own psyche, they convert this objective question into a subjective question by asking, what is it in us that made us believe in this creator God or a ruler God? And it is this enquiry pursued to the hilt that leads to this deeper truth that the notion of a personal ruler God is okay as far as it goes, but it's not good enough. Start there and then ask yourself this question: what is it in you, in any one of us, that makes us believe in this notion of a creator God or a ruler God? And then basically the answer turns up that one would like to see, look, one regards oneself as limited, and therefore there is this world around us consisting of many more people, many more beings, and our physical life, our day-to-day life is conditioned by this world that we think of as outside us. This is the answer. It's not just us. It's not just this individual I that we are accustomed to thinking about that is responsible for all that goes on in the universe. Therefore, one would like to think of this whole vast phenomena over which I do not have any individual control as being conditioned on another being, as being under the control of a much larger being. This is generally our answer. This is our psychological answer. It's not a logical answer. It's a result of telling, in answer to this inquiry, we respond by suggesting how we think of the world. What is our worldview, and hence why we would like to think of a creator or a ruler God. Fine. Then comes the deeper question. Are you so sure that you and this universe are totally separate? And this question then turns up. So the premise for believing in a ruler and a creator God becomes basically this fact which we cannot deny in terms of our existence today, that I think of myself as limited to this individual body and mind. Since I am limited, this world around me, this earth around me is much larger. And since I control my body and mind, there must be a controller of this whole universe around me. This is the psychological explanation behind the concept of a ruler or a creator God. And then this question, are you really so different from the universe, what you're thinking of as outside and what you're thinking of as inside? What is the basis for this thought? What is it in our psyche that leads us to differentiate between the world outside and this notion of an I which we regard as inside us? What is it in our psyche that leads to this dichotomy? We will address this inquiry, but suppose this root cause of difference was removed. Would then the position of a ruler or creator God be necessary? Because then if you yourself have identified with the essence of the universe, then does the psychological reason for a dichotomy between a ruler of the God and the ruler of this body and mind, is there any need for that? And then we are stumped and we are forced to answer, no, there is no need. Well then let's return to this inquiry, because it's a fundamental inquiry. Are we really that different from what we call this universe and what we call outside of us? Even at the level of matter, the cells of our body are constituted by the food we eat. The food is outside. It gets assimilated. It becomes us. A vast part of the human alimentary canal is composed of bacteria. Do I identify with the bacteria? Do I call that bacteria I? No. So even at the level of material existence, it is not true that we are so different from the universe. The thoughts we have, now let's come to the level of the mind, the thoughts we have. Well, we go to school from childhood. Are our thoughts our own? Can we say that these define us? Our thoughts change. So there's an interdependence between our thoughts and the thought world of the human species around us. So at the level of the mind, at the level of the body, we aren't that different from the universe. Very well then, what is essential to this I that one is regarding as different from the universe? And there, the enquiry into this subjective I starts in real earnest. And one understands that this notion of I with which we act in the universe turns out to be just an ad hoc construct to preserve this body and mind. It's just a way of holding this body and mind together as a thought. So suppose this thought was eradicated for good. Where then does it end? It ends with this subjective conviction that what we call this universe and with what we call this I are not different in their essential nature. That was the culmination of this lecture, and he concluded with this verse from the Kathopanishad, Nityo nityanam chetanash chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman tamatmastham yenu pashyanti dhiraha tesham shanti shashvati netaresham. He paraphrases that in English, and this is really the last paragraph, the last sentence of this lecture. He who sees in this world of manifoldness that one running through all, in this world of death, he who finds that one infinite life, and in this world of insentience and ignorance, he who finds that one light and knowledge, unto him belongs eternal peace, unto none else, unto none else. So I think I had planned to start on the next lecture today, but we'll start on next time. This last, let me repeat this verse from the Kathopanishad for what it's worth. Nityo nityanam chetanash chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman tamatmastham yenu pashyanti dhiraha tesham shanti shashvati netaresham. Om shanti shanti shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna.